It was a cold, moonlit night when Emma decided to take a shortcut through the park. She had just left a late-night study session at the library and was eager to get home. The park was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that makes your skin crawl. The only sound was the crunch of her boots on the frost-covered grass. As she walked, she noticed a figure in the distance. At first, she thought it was just another person out for a late-night stroll, but something about the way he moved made her uneasy. He was walking with an odd, almost mechanical gait, his arms swinging unnaturally at his sides. And then she saw his face. He was smiling, not a friendly smile, but a wide, grotesque grin that stretched from ear to ear. His eyes were dark, almost black, and they seemed to pierce through her. Emma quickened her pace, her heart pounding in her chest. She told herself it was just her imagination, that the man meant no harm. But when she glanced back, he was still there, still smiling, and he was closer now. She broke into a run, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The park seemed to stretch on forever, the trees closing in around her. She could hear his footsteps, behind her, steady and relentless. She dared not look back again, but she could feel his presence, like a cold hand reaching out to grab her. Finally, she burst out of the park and onto the street. She didn't stop running until she reached her apartment building. She fumbled with her keys, her hands shaking so badly she could barely unlock the door. Once inside, she slammed it shut and leaned against it, trying to catch her breath. That's when she heard it. A soft, almost melodic humming coming from the other side of the door. She froze, her blood turning to ice. The humming grew louder, more intense, and then it stopped. There was a moment of silence, and then a single, sharp knock on the door. Emma didn't move. She couldn't. She stood there, paralyzed with fear, as the knocking continued, each one louder and more insistent than the last. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. She waited for what felt like an eternity before she finally gathered the courage to look through the peephole. The hallway was empty. She let out a shaky breath and turned away from the door, only to come face to face with the smiling man. His grin was wider than ever, his eyes gleaming with a malevolent light. He reached out a hand, and Emma screamed, but no sound came out. The last thing she saw before everything went black was that horrible, endless smile. The next morning, Emma's neighbors found her apartment door wide open. Inside, everything was in perfect order, except for the large, bloody, smiley face painted on the wall. Of Emma, there was no trace, and to this day, on cold, moonlit nights, people say they can still see the smiling man wandering the park, his grin as wide and terrifying as ever, searching for his next victim. In the early hours of February 9th, 1855, the people of Devon, England, awoke to a chilling and inexplicable sight. Overnight, a series of mysterious footprints had appeared in the snow, stretching for over 100 miles across the countryside. The footprints were hoof-like, cloven and precise, as if made by a single creature that walked on two legs. They appeared on rooftops, over walls, and even across frozen rivers, defying all logic and reason. The event became known as the Devil's Footprints, and to this day, no one knows what caused them, or what walked through Devon that night. The night of the tracks, it had been a cold winter, and a fresh layer of snow blanketed the countryside. The night was quiet, the kind of stillness that feels almost unnatural. But when dawn broke, the silence was shattered by panic. Farmers, villagers, and townsfolk emerged from their homes to find a trail of hoof-like prints etched into the snow. The tracks were unlike anything they had ever seen. Each print was about 4 inches long, shaped like a cloven hoof, and spaced evenly apart, as if whatever made them had walked with purpose. The footprints were not confined to the ground. They appeared on rooftops, as if the creature had scaled walls effortlessly. They crossed over high fences and haystacks, and even traversed the frozen River Exe without breaking the ice. The tracks seemed to lead everywhere and nowhere, weaving through gardens, fields, and villages in a chaotic, meandering path. The panic spreads as word of the footprints spread. Fear gripped the region. The local newspapers were flooded with reports, and theories began to circulate. Some claimed the tracks were made by the devil himself, roaming the earth in search of souls. Others suggested they were the work of a rogue kangaroo or a large bird, though none could explain how such an animal could leave hoof-like prints or traverse such impossible terrain. The clergy declared the event a sign of divine judgment, urging people to repent. Superstitious villagers nailed horseshoes to their doors to ward off evil spirits. Even skeptics were unnerved by the sheer scale and strangeness of the phenomenon. The investigation scientists and naturalists were called in to examine the tracks. Some suggested they were made by a badger or otter, their prints distorted by the melting snow. Others proposed that a weather balloon or experimental device had left the marks. But none of these explanations could account for the sheer distance the tracks covered, their precise shape, or their appearance on rooftops and walls. One of the most chilling details was the consistency of the prints. They were all identical, as if made by a single entity that never stopped to rest, eat, or change course. The creature, whatever it was, seemed to move with an unnatural purpose, as if it were searching for something or someone. The disappearance of the tracks, as quickly as they appeared, the footprints vanished. The snow melted, and with it, the evidence of that strange night. But the fear lingered. For years afterward, people reported hearing strange noises at night, hoofbeats on rooftops, scratching at windows, and the sound of something walking just outside their doors. Some claimed to see a shadowy figure with glowing eyes and cloven feet lurking in the darkness, the legacy of the devil's footprints. To this day, the devil's footprints remain one of the most enduring mysteries of the supernatural world. Every few decades, similar tracks appear in remote areas, always in the snow, always in the dead of winter. And every time, they leave behind the same sense of dread and unease. It was January 1959, and a group of 10 hikers, led by Igor Dyatlov, trudged through the snow, their breath visible in the icy air. They were experienced, prepared, and determined to conquer the treacherous slopes of Kholat Syakhl, the dead mountain. But none of them could have imagined the horror that awaited them. The first night, the group set up camp on the slopes of the mountain, their tent a fragile sanctuary against the biting cold. As night fell, the temperature plummeted, and the wind grew louder, almost like whispers. One of the hikers, Yuri Yudin, had turned back days earlier due to illness, leaving 9 to press on. Inside the tent, the hikers joked and laughed, trying to ignore the unease that had settled over them. But then, the whispers grew louder. At first, they thought it was the wind, but the sounds were too deliberate, too human. They spoke in a language none of the hikers could understand, guttural and ancient. The hikers exchanged uneasy glances, their laughter fading into silence. The panic around midnight, something struck the tent, a deep, resonant thud that shook the ground. The hikers froze, their breath caught in their throats. Then came another thud, closer this time, followed by a low, guttural growl that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. "Get out! Get out now!" someone screamed. In a blind panic, the hikers cut their way out of the tent with knives, fleeing into the freezing night. They wore only their underwear and socks, their boots and coats left behind in their haste. The snow burned their feet, but they didn't stop. They couldn't stop. Behind them, the growling grew louder, accompanied by the sound of heavy footsteps crunching through the snow. The cedar tree. The group split up, some heading toward a nearby cedar tree, others stumbling blindly into the darkness. Those who reached, the tree tried to build a fire, their hands shaking so badly they could barely light a match. The whispers returned, circling them like predators. One by one, the hikers began to scream, their voices swallowed by the night. When the first two, Bodies were found weeks later. They were huddled near the tree, their faces frozen in expressions of sheer terror. Their eyes were wide, their mouths open as if caught mid-scream. The searchers noted something strange. The tree's branches were broken, as if something heavy had climbed down from above. The ravine. The remaining hikers had fled deeper into the forest, toward a ravine. What happened to them there was even more horrifying. When their bodies were discovered months later, they bore gruesome injuries. One hiker's skull was crushed. Another's ribs were shattered, as if struck by a tremendous force. The worst was Lyudmila Dubinina, whose tongue and eyes were missing, her face frozen in a silent scream. The searchers also found something else. Strange, glowing footprints in the snow, leading away from the ravine. The prints were large, too large to be human, and they seemed to radiate an unnatural heat, melting the snow around them. The theories. The official investigation concluded that the hikers had died of a compelling natural force, but the details were buried. Locals whispered of curses and ancient spirits that roamed the mountains. Some claimed to have seen a towering figure with glowing eyes and cloven feet stalking the slopes. Others spoke of strange lights in the sky and a low humming sound that made their teeth ache. Years later, a diary was found among the hikers' belongings. The final entry, written in a shaky hand, read, "It's here. It's watching us. We can't escape. God help us."